All right, today we are diving into one of the most powerful books you will ever read, Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. This book is, well, it's part harrowing memoir, part profound philosophy, and it wrestles with the question that gets to the very heart of being human. How do we find purpose? Especially when we're facing the absolute worst life can throw at us.
So, let's kick things off with a quote that's really the engine of this entire book. This idea, from the philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, became the central hypothesis that Frankl, a psychiatrist, found himself testing in the most extreme, the most horrifying laboratory imaginable, the Nazi concentration camps during World War II.
You know, you'd think Frankl would have been thrilled that his book became a massive bestseller, but his take on it was, well, it was pretty surprising. He didn't see it as a personal win. Instead, he saw it as a symptom, an expression of the misery of our time. He figured if millions of people are desperately grabbing a book about finding meaning, it's because there's a deep hunger for it out there. It proves this search isn't some luxury, it's a fundamental human need.
To really get Frankl's philosophy, we have to first understand the experience that created it. This wasn't something he dreamed up in a comfortable office. It was forged in fire. As a prisoner, he acted as an observer, watching his own mind and the minds of those around him, and he saw a clear, predictable, psychological path that people followed through the horror.
Frankl breaks down this journey into three distinct phases. First, there was the initial shock of being admitted to the camp. That was followed by a long period of deep apathy, which was actually a kind of survival mode. But it's the third phase that might be the most surprising, a feeling of depersonalization after being freed, a real struggle to learn how to be a person again.
So phase 1, shock. It began with being systematically dehumanized. The second you arrived at a camp like Auschwitz, you were stripped of absolutely everything. Frankl himself lost the manuscript for a scientific book he'd spent his life working on. And in that moment, he said he struck out his whole former life. He wasn't Dr. Viktor Frankl anymore. He was prisoner number 119104.
And the reality of this new world was immediate and just brutal. An SS officer would play what the prisoners called the finger game. He'd just casually point. Left, you go to the gas chamber. Right, you go to forced labor. About 90% of the people on Frankl's transport were sent to the left. Their lives were over in a matter of hours. Just surviving that first moment was pure chance.
For the few who survived that initial selection, phase 2 began, apathy. Now this sounds bad, right? But Frankl says it was essential. It was a protective shell. To deal with the daily beatings, the starvation, the constant death all around you, you had to numb your feelings. Disgust, horror, pity. Those became luxuries you just couldn't afford. It was a kind of emotional death, and it was necessary to stay physically alive.
But it's right here, in this absolute pit of suffering and dehumanization, that Frankl makes his most incredible discovery. He realizes that while the Nazis could control every single aspect of his external world, there was one thing they could never ever touch.
And this is the core idea of the entire book. The one thing that can never be taken from you. Even when you are stripped bare, left with literally nothing, you still have the freedom to choose your response. You can choose your attitude. You can choose your inner path. And that freedom, Frankl says, is absolute. So you have this total split. On one hand, you've got your outward fate, completely controlled by hunger, brutality, and the ever-present threat of death. But on the other hand, you have your inner decision. And Frankl saw proof of this everywhere. He saw men who, in the middle of all that horror, would comfort others, who would give away their last tiny piece of bread. They were living proof that you could rise above your fate.
So, where did this inner strength come from? Well, Frankl found it in a few key places. He would have these vivid conversations in his mind with his wife, feeling her presence so strongly it felt more real than the world around him. He found moments of pure bliss just looking at a sunset over a muddy field. He and another prisoner even made a deal to tell each other one funny story every single day. And he clung to the hope, the future goal of one day rewriting his lost book. These weren't escapes, they were anchors.
Now these powerful insights didn't just stay on the page. They became the actual foundation for Frankl's own school of psychotherapy. He called it logotherapy, and it was a radical departure from the psychology of his time.
The name pretty much tells you everything. Logos is the Greek word for meaning.
So logotherapy is quite literally therapy centered on meaning. Its core belief is that our deepest, most fundamental drive as human beings isn't for power or pleasure, it's a will to meaning. It's this innate need to find a purpose for our lives.
And this was a direct challenge to the dominant Freudian view that we're all driven by a will to pleasure. Frankl said, look, we're not just creatures trying to get comfortable and avoid pain. We're creatures who are searching for a reason to live. As he saw with his own eyes, we can put up with almost any amount of suffering as long as we have a why.
So the big question is, how do we find this meaning? Frankl gives us three broad paths. The first is through creating something, through our work or our deeds. The second is by experiencing something fully, like beauty, or through loving another person. And the third path, maybe the most radical one, is through the attitude we choose to take towards suffering that we simply cannot avoid.
To explain that third path, Frankl tells this incredible story from his clinical practice after the war. An elderly doctor came to him just completely crushed by depression after his wife had died. He saw no reason to go on living. Frankl didn't offer him some easy platitude. He just asked him a question.
What would have happened, doctor, Frankl asked, if you had died first and your wife had to survive you? The doctor thought for a moment and said, oh, for her, that would have been terrible. And Frankl gently replied, you see, doctor, such a suffering has been spared her, and it is you who have spared her the suffering. In that single moment, the doctor's perspective shifted. His grief wasn't meaningless pain anymore. It was a sacrifice. It was a final, meaningful act of love.
And this brings us to the ultimate challenge of the book. Frankl's message isn't just about passively finding meaning. It's about actively taking responsibility for it.
This is where Frankl just flips the entire script on us. We spend so much time asking life, what is my meaning? What's the point? And Frankl says, that's the wrong question. It's not you who gets to ask. It is life that is asking you. Every day, every moment, life is posing questions to us. Our meaning isn't found in asking, but in how we choose to answer.
So in the end, Frankl's journey through hell and back teaches us that meaning is always possible, and that our ultimate freedom is the power to choose our response. The book doesn't give us a neat little answer. Instead, it leaves us with a question, the same question that life is asking each of us. Right now, what does it ask of you, and how will you answer?